Tonight on Nation to Nation, Autumn Windego speaks out about living under the threat of banishment. The Anishinaabe mother refuses to be silenced any longer by Chief and Council of the Rainy River First Nation. That's because she sees a child welfare system desperately in need of change.
I will not stop advocating, and I will always stand my ground and protect myself. And I'm not just protecting myself, I'm protecting my babies.
Also, the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation in Winnipeg has a new leader, and she's the first Indigenous woman to do so.
After a long search and selection committee, I threw my hat in, and I am absolutely honored to have been selected as the Executive Director of the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation.
Hello, I'm Todd Lamorin, and welcome to Nation. Last week, we first told you about an APTN news source facing banishment from her home in a First Nation in northwestern Ontario. It all has to do with an Anishinaabe mother of two speaking out on the child welfare crisis, particularly in Treaty 3 territory. But Chief and Council of the Rainy River First Nation see it differently. They threaten to exile her for what they call continued attacks, even putting it in writing. Tonight we hear from Autumn Windego herself, who joins us now from Fort Frances, Ontario. Thank you for coming on Nation to Nation, Ms. Windego.
Thank you for having me.
Now, last week you had your lawyer speak for you on this show, but tonight you're the one doing the talking. Why did you decide to do that?
I decided to come on the show to tell my side of the story, and because this has been a huge toll on me, and I will not stop advocating, and I will always stand my ground and protect myself. And I'm not just protecting myself, I'm protecting my babies as well, because they shouldn't be have to be removed from their home, and they shouldn't have to have their mother leave their home.
Are you still in your home? Has there been any contact with Chief and Council about this supposed banishment?
I haven't heard anything from Chief and Council or the community, and yes, I am still in my home.
Do you think Chief and Council of Rainy River First Nation, when they perhaps see this interview, may consider it an attack and perhaps step up efforts to get you out of your home?
I am definitely concerned about that and worried. I don't know what they see as attacks, because I personally think that anything that I posted or anything that I shared hasn't been an attack on the community care program.
So again, I have to ask you, why do you feel you need to do this then?
So I've been advocating for children in care and youth in care for a while now. Myself, I was the Crown Ward, and I feel like there isn't enough voices for the youth and the children and the families. And I think it's important to keep advocating, because if no one advocates, there's going to be no one who is.
What is it that you're advocating about? What is it that you see that is wrong with the child welfare system there?
What I see wrong in the system is that kids are aging out and they don't have their identity. They feel lost. Families aren't being reunited as common as they should. Our youth are struggling. Kids are always being moved from home to home, and siblings are always being separated. And we have a lot of parents who end up far more worse than where they are when the kids are apprehended.
Of course, what you've just talked about could be a lot of child welfare agencies right across Canada. I suppose, why has the Chief and Council of Rainy River gone to you or pointed you out as somebody who's continuing to attack them?
I'm not sure. From what I've been posting, I did make one post. Actually, I made two posts when they removed a kid who was in care from a caregiver, and I just made those two posts and just me speaking out in the articles. I'm not sure why they see these as attacks. They are well aware of what they did by removing that child was wrong, and they do know the crises that are happening right now in the system.
You received a letter from Chief and Counsel in January and you kept quiet until last week. Why is that? What was happening during that time from January to now?
I guess I didn't want to make any public posts on it because I didn't want to be removed from my home. I have my two daughters that I'm taking care of. And for me, myself, I grew up in an urban setting in a town, and I am really trying to have my kids connected to their community because it is their grassroots. And I didn't want to do anything to jeopardize that, but since they weren't responding, it was making me worried because I still wanted to advocate. Right now I've been working on this docuseries and I've been doing other work, and I was afraid that me continuing to do this, they could use anything that I said and use it against me.
You've spoken of being capable of handling the stress of the situation, though you have talked about having some anxiety about it. But more than anxiety, what has it been like for you? I can't imagine what it'd be like for someone who's not in a stable situation like you are.
I have been very worried because a supervisor that was in charge of the CCP team. I was scared that the supervisor and one of the counselor members were going to come and apprehend my kids. I was constantly in fear whenever I went into a building like Walmart. I would always check the parking lot first before I went in, because if I went in there and if I ran into them, my heart started racing. I was scared that they would say something to me because I felt like that would be the place that they would say something to me. And at nighttime, my mind would be racing all the time because, like I said, advocating is one thing that I am passionate about. And I was afraid that, would I have to let this go? Can I continue on? So.
You, as you mentioned before, you grew up in care, and so did your partner, Tyler, in medicine, and you're raising your children together. In fact, you said you're the first in 4 generations to raise your own kids. I suppose, shouldn't someone like you and Tyler be encouraged and supported?
I feel like that too. I feel like we definitely need to be supporting parents more, especially, like, I am proud of myself and I am proud of my the father of my girls, that we are relooking wholly differently at parenting, because we both came from parents who suffered with addiction of alcohol, and we weren't raised by our parents. It was definitely a huge battle because you have to overcome your trauma, and it's difficult because every new little thing of parenting could trigger something from when you were a kid. And I'm really glad that I have Tyler, that when we are faced with an obstacle, that we are able to work on it and think about how we want to parent our babies.
I imagine through everything you've just told me, that's why you're such an advocate for changing the child welfare system.
Yes. Actually, so I guess these 2 years have been a big healing journey for me. I found out I was conceived by rape. I grew up hating. I had a lot of resentment and anger towards my mom. She was never around. When she passed, she was actually, I felt like a stranger to me. And when she passed on, there was one bag that I got to have of her items, and there just happened to be court documents in there. And that's when I found out I was conceived by rape. And that there lifted a whole lot off me, because I no longer held that anger towards my mom. Instead, I felt really bad for her, and I felt sad that she wasn't able to have anyone to talk to about it and to heal properly.
But it sounds like that despite that, you yourself have healed once you got these court documents.
Yes, yeah, it made me have a whole different understanding on where she was and where she was coming from. And it made me look at it that we need to find a new way to be supporting these parents. Because in the long run, we have far more kids aging out of the system. And I know myself, if I didn't have the proper support, I would have been lost.
It sounds like you've been through the ringer a bit, but you've got things well in hand. You know what you're doing. And I want to thank you for sharing some of this story with me, even though some of it is pretty difficult.
I have gotten a lot better at it. I remember when I first started speaking about my story, I would cry through the whole entire process, but now every single time I share it, I feel like it helps me grow and heal myself.
Well, I hope you grow and heal after our conversation as well. Thank you again for speaking to me.
Yes, thank you for having me.
After the break, we speak to the new Executive Director of the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation, Stephanie Scott. Welcome back. For the first time, an Indigenous woman is set to lead the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation. The Winnipeg-based centre does a couple of things. It stores the historical documents, stories, and other information collected by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And it looks to advance reconciliation through the TRC's 94 calls to action. Stephanie Scott has just been named the centre's new executive director, having worked there since 2016, and she joins me now. Welcome to Nation, Ms. Scott.
Hi, Todd. Thank you for having me.
As I was talking to you off camera, I've known you for about 20 years. You got your start in broadcast, or I shouldn't say that, I don't know, but we met at APTN, and you were the first producer of Contact. So I'm just wondering, I want to say congratulations on your new position, but how did you go from a broadcast career to the executive director of the NCTR?
Well, in the last 20 years, I've spent, working my way up the ladder, I guess you could say. I started out at CBC, APTN. I've worked for the Film Board. I also did community engagement with newcomer youth and high-risk Indigenous youth, and we talked to them about global issues, etc. And then when that ended, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission started, and I was hired on as the coordinator in statement gathering. And then I was promoted to manager of statement gathering, and then I worked as well with as the executive assistant to the chair. And when the TRC ended, my former director, Ry Moran, asked me to join him at the NCTR and to continue the work. So I've been here for the last 5 years as the director of operations, and then I took on the acting role when he went back home to Victoria to take care of his family. And after a long search and selection committee, I threw my hat in, and I am absolutely honored to have been selected as the executive director of the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation.
So let's remind our viewers, which I did a little bit in my introduction, but what does the NCTR do?
So in 2015, we opened in 2015. It's the permanent home for all statements, documents, and other materials gathered by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. I was on the road with them, and I've heard from hundreds and thousands of residential school survivors in regard to what the true history was and what took place in those schools. The NCTR is a home for survivors. It provides a site for remembrance, showing respect to survivors and their loved ones. And we provide education to Indigenous and non-Canadians alike. This fall, we did a very large Every Child Matters education through reconciliation in partnership with APTN, CBC, National Film Board, Wapakoni. We had 12,000 teachers view the content, and over 500,000 students participate to learn about residential school history, survivors, statements, etc., and culture and language. And we talked about it all in the hopes that we can help Canadians understand what happened and lead towards reconciliation.
The University of Manitoba says the centre is entering a new phase. It's gotten a $6 million grant. So what's going to happen with that?
So we've just received a grant that's going to provide funding to support research in regard to the health legacies of childhood trauma from residential schools, to be created in partnership with the Manitoba Health Centre for Policy. We're going to develop statistical workshops with the Indigenous communities to consult the NCTR records. We have over 5 million records, and we're going to search them. We're going to use scientific methods to analyze a list of names of children that passed away in residential school, so that we can finally have a true number and understanding how those young children died, where they ended up, where they've been buried, how come they never made it home, so that our communities can start to heal. It's very, very difficult for me to believe that in this day and age, there are still family members that don't have any idea where their children ended up when they went away to residential school. It's heartbreaking.
In fact, the number I've heard for a couple of years now, there's more than 4,000 people, and we don't know where their final resting place. How possible do you feel it be to locate their resting place and finally give that closure?
There's ongoing calls to action and work that's being performed and done. We're continuing to apply for federal funding, which is integral to continuing doing the work with the federal government. It's absolutely important that we find these children and return them home. I think communities have been waiting. We've been doing a lot of consultation in regard to reaching out and working with survivors. We've heard stories, and this is a little bit of trigger warning that, you know, I've sat with survivors that talked about when they were young children, 7, 8 years old, that had other young babies pass away in their arms. And to me, I can't imagine being that young and alone and, not having your family with you, not having the ones that loved you to take you and carry you through that.
Ms. Scott, I just want to turn now to the calls of action that you've mentioned. There were 94 of them. And I know that there are various groupings of it, and was aimed at various levels of government. For example, here in Ottawa, they raised the Algonquin flag at City Hall, and that was a call to action. So my question is, how well have various levels of government done in implementing the calls to action?
Well, back in December, the former commissioners announced that there was, concern, and they were alarmed about the slow inception of some of the calls to action. And we fully support and agree that the government has to continue to action the 94 calls to action in various states. There's some work that's been done. There's a lot of work that's being done in communities on the ground with our peoples. And I think the government definitely needs to step in and honor those calls to action and move them forward.
Now, on the other hand, just talking about the word reconciliation, for example, again, I'm using an Ottawa example. It was used a lot by the city council and the city mayor to give a Algonquin group a bunch of land to develop. So they use it as an act of reconciliation. I don't want you to comment on the development, which you probably have no idea what I'm talking about, but has reconciliation become a shorthand for not doing any meaningful change?
Well, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think reconciliation is a big word, and it means many things to many people, many nations, many communities. I think that there has been a small amount of change. I think we're ready to move forward. It's definitely time for relationships. I think we definitely need to deal with the legacy of residential schools before we truly get to reconciliation. There's decades upon decades of work to be done. I'm an Indigenous woman living in this country, and it hasn't been an easy journey. I'm also a 60 scoop survivor, and my birth mother attended residential school and had me at a very young age. And when she gave birth to me in the hospital, I was automatically taken away. She held me once and I was gone. I had to live with that for, my life. And I'm going to tell you how old I am, but 2 decades, I'm almost just over 50. Okay, so I'm over 50. And, it's taken a long time to regroup, recover, learn who I am, where I've come from. And that's really what it's all about, is becoming solid and powerful. And our people are making change. And we're, being educated, we're survivors, knowledge keepers, elders, doctors, lawyers, scientists. Change is coming.
I guess what I'm getting at is, can somebody, a city mayor or councillor or whomever, do something that's pretty much just symbolic, say it's reconciliation, dust their hands off and say, hey, we've reconciled? Or is there really something more meaningful that has to happen?
Relationships. I think you have to really work on relationships. I don't think the dusting of hands is ever complete or will be complete. You know, I think it's got to continue on for hundreds of years. So no dusting of the hands, please.
And you speak about it's got to continue for hundreds of years. What is the future of the center itself? Are the records something that future scholars, for example, will be able to access one day?
Yes, for sure. We are in the process of hiring a research and academic director. So that position is going up very soon. We're going to be working with research. We are going to produce scholarly papers, and we're going to make it totally accessible to Canadians. We've heard and conducted market research where Canadians want stories told by video and film, and they hold us responsible to that, and we're accountable to delivering that information in regard to educating the public.
Well, we certainly look forward to what comes out of this $6 million grant and the future work that you're going to be the head of. Ms. Scott, thank you for speaking to me.
Thank you, Todd. You take care.
You as well. Thank you. We'll have more after another short break. Welcome back. Saul Mamakwa is the NDP MPP for a riding in Northern Ontario. In a tweet he put out a few days ago, he pictured himself getting vaccinated, with a caption that reads, he was invited to the Sandy Lake First Nation to get a second dose of vaccine, and he was there to promote vaccine uptake in fly-in First Nations. Today in Ontario's question period, he asked about vaccines for urban Indigenous people. But Premier Doug Ford instead accused Mamakwa of cutting in line to get vaccinated.
So thank you for doing that and kind of jumping the line, as I talked to a few chiefs that were pretty upset about that. Order. For flying into a community that he doesn't belong, but that's here nor there.
Order. Mamakwa and Ontario NDP leader Andrea Horwath held a press conference just a few hours later to address Ford's comments.
To make those statements when you make an effort to increase the vaccinations in the north, where they were, I was getting calls a couple weeks before, the sign-up was very low, as low as 20%, as high as 60%. And those comments that were made were very, I thought it was just a lack of understanding, but actually it's a lack of respect to Indigenous people. It's a lack of compassion for Indigenous people.
This has no place in Ontario's Parliament. And so I call on the Premier not only to apologize to Mr. Mamakwa, but to Indigenous leadership and people who called on him to join them in helping to protect their communities.
As I record this, there's still no indication that Premier Ford has apologized or will do so soon. And that's all the time we have this week. I'm Todd Lamoran, hoping you're staying safe and healthy and getting vaccinated. Thanks for watching.